One and be like, hey, Tori, come check out the edge. You like that edge, right? You know, you gotta admire your work.
You know what I admire, Matt Green?
New edger and really change the game.
Or do you know what I'm going to admire on Tuesday?
What's that?
The Tennessee Volunteers being number 1 in the college football playoff rankings.
Coming in hot.
There's no debate. I think that one's actually locked up. I think Tennessee being number 1 in the college football playoff rankings is done. I don't see a path.
I think so.
Yeah, I think there's no path for them not to be number 1 in the CFP first rankings.
They are now number 2, tied for number 2, and they
more first place votes than Ohio State, though.
And I feel like that's the tiebreaker, right? That puts they should be 2, Ohio State should be 3. But
I was gonna say, what are they gonna do on Saturday? Are they just gonna list for the 2 different games, like number 2 Ohio State and number 2 Tennessee?
I'm sure they will, because I think that's how they did it with Wake Forest. And Wake Forest and USC this past week were both tied at number 10.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to be once the playoff rankings are set, that's all they want to care. That's the ranking next to everybody. It's just the playoff ranking.
But I'm saying on TV, they don't put that up, do they?
I think that's what everyone uses from that point on. It's like, that's really the only rankings that matter.
So you think CBS will have number 1 Tennessee, number 2 Georgia on CBS on Saturday?
If that is indeed the ranking. I don't know if I see it that way. I think, do we want to give our top 6 right now?
I think we should do it. Let's do our CFP, because no one cares. Like you said, no one cares about the AP poll anymore. It's now CFP season. So how would you do it? Who is your top 6, right? How about this? We'll first do what we think it's going to be, and then we'll do what we would do if we were in charge of the committee. So first, do your top 6 of what you guess it's going to be on Tuesday.
Okay, so my guess is I think it's going to be Georgia number 1, Ohio State 2, Tennessee 3, Michigan 4, Clemson 5, and TCU 6. But where I differ is I would go Georgia number 1, Tennessee. Wait, I said Ohio State 2 the first time, right? Yeah, I would put Tennessee 2.
Wait, hold on. Let me so we don't get it confused. So we'll just do the ones that you're saying 1 Georgia that you think that the committee will have on Tuesday. You think it's gonna be 1 Georgia, 2 Ohio State, 3 Tennessee, 4 who?
Michigan.
Okay. 5 Clemson.
5 Clemson.
6 TCU. Okay. I think it's gonna be on Tuesday 1 Tennessee, 2 Georgia, 3 Ohio State, 4 Michigan. I think it's going to be 5 Clemson, and then 6 Alabama. But here's my October surprise for you guys. I could see Alabama being ahead of both Clemson and even Michigan in the first year.
No, not Michigan. But I could definitely see them being ahead of TCU and Clemson.
TCU is not going to get any love. I don't think TCU has a chance. Like Oregon, I think is going to be ahead of them. I think USC is maybe going to be ahead of them.
Resume is solid. I mean, they have wins over Kansas State and Oklahoma State at this point. Like
41-31 over West Virginia. Slow starters. I just don't think there's going to be a lot of buy-in from the committee.
Mean, if you have Tennessee number 1, that does change. I mean, that's obviously you view them as the best team in the country. So losing to them by 3 points on the road, you could justify them being 4 or 5 in the country. And it's Alabama. We all know it's Alabama. So yeah, I could see them being ahead of Clemson and TCU, but not Michigan, because they've been dominant.
I'm not picking them. I'm just saying that's like the wild card. Is I'm ready for folks to get upset about where Bama is going to be placed, because I think Bama is going to be higher than maybe.
I think you're right. I think that's a good point. I didn't have them in my top 6, but I bet you they probably will be. And then I personally would have Ohio State at 3. I just don't think the committee is going to have them that low. I could even see them being number 1.
Well, do your 1 through 6 of what you would do personally.
My number 1 would be Georgia. Just looking at them, just because of the offensively and defensively, like if you look at resumes with Georgia and Tennessee, like obviously the win over Alabama is like one of the best wins, maybe the best win in college football this year. But it is also a 3-point win at home. Like it's over a great team. But we've seen Alabama play a lot of close games with a lot of teams this year, you know. So it like with an Arkansas, with a Texas A&M, so with a Texas. So it's hard to quantify. Like, yeah, is this Alabama that's the fourth best team in the country, or is this Alabama who's more like a borderline top 10 team? It's hard to say. And then you have Georgia with wins over like a South Carolina doesn't look very good right now. It is a road a blowout win on the road, but the Oregon win, I mean, each week, like Oregon is showing they look like the best team in the Pac-12, and the way Georgia just dominated them, it's hard to say the Tennessee win over Alabama is that much better than Georgia's win over Oregon, simply because of, I mean, they won by 46 points, right? Like they just dominated this team that's scoring like 45 points a game. And then obviously Georgia, second in the country, giving up like 9 points a game right now. I think that's the biggest difference to me with Georgia and Tennessee, because Georgia's got a top 10 offense. Maybe, I mean, I think they're 8th in the country in scoring offense. I think they're even top 5 in terms of total offense per game. So like they're not right there with Tennessee, because Tennessee just has a truly just special dynamic offense, but Georgia still has a very dominant offense that we saw the turnovers, but we'll get to them, what they did this week. But so Georgia's offense has been great, and the fact that their defense has been one of the best in the country. I think that's what separates Georgia and Tennessee for me. So I personally would have Tennessee number 2 and Ohio State 3. It feels like the committee not wanting the whole SEC bias kind of in their head. They're going to have Georgia and Tennessee at 1 and 3, in my opinion, and Ohio State will be like in the top 2 most likely, and then probably Michigan at 4. I think Michigan at 4 has kind of solidified themselves because they've looked more dominant than Clemson. And honestly, Clemson's getting probably slept on as well, because we're all bashing the ACC and Wake Forest. Obviously, we'll get to them later, but they looked awful. We saw what they did against Clemson, and now Syracuse dropping a week after their loss against Clemson, and NC State hasn't looked like what we thought they were going to be. Like, it's hard to really evaluate Clemson's schedule, and they've had some close games. Michigan's pretty much just been dominant each week. So I think they're a solid spot ahead of Clemson. But TCU honestly might have a better resume than both of them. I feel like the Big 12 is just a really good conference. And I mean, TCU, like we're all talking about Tennessee's offense, but TCU is right up there with them in terms of just how balanced they are throwing, passing and running too. Like I think TCU is kind of getting slept on. And then I'm probably sleeping on Alabama too, because I mean, they're Alabama, and it wouldn't surprise anybody if they just ran the table from here on out and won it all. So I don't know. I currently have Alabama outside the top 6 though.
Interesting. It's funny because I'm like, if you had a gun to anyone's head of like, do you really believe that Alabama is not one of the 6 best teams in the country right now? I think everyone would agree. No, they're one of the 6 best teams in the country. Like, there's no path for them not being one of the 6 best, because like when you think about it on a neutral field, Bama versus TCU, Bama versus Oregon, Bama versus Clemson, Bama versus Michigan. We all know they're favored in every one of those games on a neutral site. Some of them by double digits.
But there's a difference between the power ranking and the Vegas odds, you know, and just what the sport. It's like we have to keep track of like why the polls exist the way they do. It's why like number 5 loses to number 2 by 1 touchdown. And it's like, okay, now they're going to be number 9. It's like, are they number 9, or are your rankings perfect and they're a touchdown worse than the team that's 3 spots higher than them? So it's just like the rankings are kind of an arbitrary thing, but it's like you just have to. This is how the rankings in college football have always.
But who actually believes that Alabama is not better than Michigan and Clemson? Who actually believes that to their core? Like they have this it's just deep in their core that they're better.
No, I know what you mean, but it's very different.
Alabama's only loss is an unbelievable 52-49 on the road, crazy number 1 offense in the country loss. And I mean, they were right there. Like it's unbelievable the way Tennessee won that game. I think people have gone way too far the other way with Alabama.
Without a doubt. And they missed the field goal right before. I mean, they could have won the game, but it's it's just the college football rankings. This is how they exist, and it's most.
But what I'm saying is, this is your opportunity.
deserving.
These are your top 6. Like, this is your opportunity to do your top 6.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Because it's this combination of doing the best teams versus most deserving teams.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if you go back to 2018 when there was the conversation about Georgia and Oklahoma, it's like Alabama was just so head and shoulders the number one. They were talking about that being like the greatest team in SEC history at that point, to his first year as the starter. Just scored 50 points a game on everybody. And clearly Georgia at number 4 versus Alabama being 1 was like a 14, 15-point dog in that game, I think. And Georgia dominated most of the game, led for like 3.5 quarters, and then lost at the end. So it's like you came out of this game obviously thinking Georgia was better than you previously did, but we have to move them from 4 to 5 in our rankings because of most deserving and the Big 12 champion, that sort of thing. So it's like there's just a formula that goes with the rankings. And right now, TCU is undefeated playing a Big 12 schedule. Clemson's undefeated playing an ACC schedule. They go ahead of the team with 1 loss, I feel like, at this point. Like, Alabama's still number 7. And that's the thing is Alabama, there's a perception of what Alabama is. And in 2022, they just haven't necessarily just dominated everyone they've played. They've played a lot of close games. And I don't know. I think we're all – wondering LSU coming up, Ole Miss coming up. Like, those are some teams that can, both on the road, like those are some teams that could give them some problems. We've seen them on the road. So there's the perception that is Alabama and what the Vegas odds makers are going to do and what the public is going to, how the public is going to bet on Alabama. So that like lays the lines, but it doesn't necessarily mean they deserve to be ranked higher than a team like Clemson or TCU to this point.
That's fair. So you're going to like mine 1 through 6. I think it's 1 Tennessee, 2 Georgia, 3 Alabama.
Oh,
yes. Alabama.
Wow.
I'm doing my playoff, like who I think are the top 6 teams in the country right now and how I would see them in based on what I've seen to this point in the year. I would do 1 Tennessee, 2 Georgia, 3 Bama, 4, you ready for this? Michigan, 5 Ohio State, 6 TCU. Clemson is not one of the 6 best teams in the country. We need to move on from this. We need to move on from the DJ Uiagalelei time. We need to move on from Clemson winning a playoff game. We have to move on from just being constricted by the Clemson aura of never losing a home game, never losing these regular season games. They just keep surviving just barely. This is not an elite football team. This is not a team that's running the college football playoff gauntlet. TCU with that offense, do we think they're not better than Clemson right now? What more does TCU have to do? I think TCU is right. Like, that's the fun conversation, is what that matchup looks like on a neutral side. I would like to see TCU's offense versus Clemson's defense on a neutral field. But right now, I lean TCU.
Yeah, I didn't make that clear. I did have TCU 5, Clemson 6.
Yeah. I struggled the most with like Michigan and Ohio State, but I am leaning, Matt Green, on October 31st, because we're recording this now past the midnight hour. I am leaning spooky season towards the Michigan Wolverines being better than Ohio State right now. I think I'm leaning more and more in that direction to this point. I've been more impressed of their overall body of work. I understand the schedule early on. I feel like Michigan just has a much better handle on who they are. And we'll get into Marvin Harrison, who showed out this weekend. But, I mean, there's just something that feels a little off with Ohio State. Just something feels a little off. And we'll see if it ultimately matters. But I don't know. I think it's a little thing to monitor is Michigan. I mean, they have to go and beat them in Columbus this time. But I don't know. That's my top 6. Is it spicy?
That's spicy, all right. And yeah, just looking at Ohio State's schedule, like, I mean, man, this is, I know it's not necessarily their fault, but this is awful. Like, you got a down Wisconsin, a down Iowa. Honestly, a year where you get the Big Ten East and you got Wisconsin and Iowa from the West, that's probably one of the tougher Big Ten schedules. And you play Notre Dame at a conference. Notre Dame's just not a good team. Like, Ohio State's defense looked good in that game, but wasn't necessarily a dominating performance by any means. And then it's like you had Penn State, and now 3 weeks, Northwestern, Indiana, Maryland, and then we got the Michigan game. Is that a 12-game season, or is that a 2-game season in 13 weeks? Like, it's just kind of crazy. So Ohio State, it's so hard to evaluate them because so many times they don't play that difficult of a schedule, which is why it seems like, but this is a pre-Ryan Day thing too. Like under Urban Meyer, they seem to always have that one lapse a year against inexplicably against Iowa or Purdue or whoever. Under Ryan Day, they haven't really done that. They just taken care of business. I mean, Michigan was a playoff team, so that was the only loss. They lose. Oh, they lost to Oregon as well, and that's another really good team, not necessarily just a inexplicable loss or anything. But I just assume both of these teams are going to be undefeated when they meet on whatever that is, November 26th. And I mean, that's basically a semifinal. I mean, who are they going to get from the West? Minnesota at this point?
Wait, no, they're getting Illinois.
Illinois.
Yeah, they're going to get Illinois.
Illinois is looking solid for sure. So
we've done this before, though.
Well,
the Big Ten West. They're this one scrappy Wisconsin. They're going to
exactly, and the rankings will work there, and it'll be the number 9 by the time the Big Ten championship works out. Like,
Iowa had the number 2 scoring defense going into the Michigan Big Ten title game last year, and Michigan just obliterated them off the face of the earth. If Michigan or Ohio State gets Illinois, like Illinois fans, and look,
Wisconsin. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, Illinois is awesome. It's a great story, but they're getting blown out the face of the earth in the Big Ten title game against either Michigan or Ohio State. We don't have to pretend. Like, we don't have to live in this false reality.
I mean, Northwestern, played them super close that year with Fields. It's like, I don't know. Like, Wisconsin has had their
2020 was weird.
12-0
reasons, and that was one of them.
Iowa was like top 4 one year in the Big Ten championship a few years ago, but it's I don't know, when was the last Big Ten West to win the Big Ten?
It had to be Wisconsin.
Probably Russell Wilson days or something like that. Maybe not that long ago.
It had to be Wisconsin. I just don't know which year it was. I know it wasn't Iowa. I know it wasn't like a Purdue or Northwestern.
Yeah, that's got to be 2020.
Was it one of maybe the Jack Cones years?
Earliest.
Yeah. I don't know.